Good morning and welcome to a special webinar offering from Facts Institute for County Government, um, also known as ICG. We're the training and education arm of FAC, and we're supported by UF IFAS. They're our exclusive training partner. And now today's presentation comes on the heels of the completion of the 2020 census, which in some ways seems a bit anticlimactic, as there was a really tremendous buildup of ensuring that we have a complete count. And while COVID created some timeline adjustments for everybody, some of you may be asking, what happens next? Well, aside from just reporting the raw numbers and all the various subcategories that the U.S. Census reports on, there is congressional redistricting that will begin, if not sometime in the early fall, at least preliminarily, it'll begin next year. But one other effect of the census is a state provision in the Florida Constitution that specifically under provision Article 8 requires that after each decennial census, the Board of County Commissioners shall divide the county into districts of contiguous territory as nearly equal in population as practicable. Now, while that seems fairly straightforward, there are nuances and other issues that counties ought to consider before adjusting county commission boundaries. Now, fortunately, we have one of the few experts in our state that understands the law and many of its nuances, and that's today's presenter, Mr. Kurt Spitzer. Mr. Spitzer, in many ways, is a kind of a jack of all trades when it comes to county government. I've known him for a very long time. He's actually a former executive director of the Florida Association of Counties. He was actually the executive director for about 10 years back in the late 80s, early 90s. And then later on, he formed back in 1989, Kurt Spitzer and Associates. He specializes in services for local governments in Florida and has served as the lead consultant for more than 20 local redistricting projects over the past 20 years, ranging anywhere from populations of 7,200 for those counties and up to 1 million in population. He also helped form the Florida Stormwater Association in 1993, and he currently represents that association, the Florida legislature, in the rulemaking process of state and federal agencies. So he's got more than 40 years experience in county and state issues. He is one of the individuals we go to for some of the water policy issues we deal with, but fortunately, he also has this specialization in redistricting. And so I am very happy that he has volunteered his time to come and make this presentation. And so with that, and no further ado, Kurt, I'm going to turn it over to you, give you control. I'm going to minimize my screen to save some of the bandwidth. And as always, for the participants, we've got the Q&A and the chat feature if you've got questions. And we talked in advance of this presentation about if you've got questions, we might probably take a pause right before Kurt gets into some of the case studies, because the presentation's fairly dense and it's got a lot of information. So that's kind of how we're going to handle it. So don't be shy about asking questions if you have them. We'll try to address them maybe in two parts, right before the case studies and then afterward. So Kurt, I'm going to stop and I'm going to give you control of the wheel. So thank you.
Great, very good, thanks. I appreciate that introduction. I always chuckle a little bit when people tell county commissioners to not be shy and to feel free to ask questions. So today we're going to talk a little bit about redistricting, kind of three different main categories within this webinar today. One is some general guidelines for redistricting. Second, we'll talk about a case study. And then last, we'll discuss what I see are as some emerging issues in this redistricting process. And so with that, we'll start with the first slide here in terms of what redistricting is. I often hear people use the words redistricting and reapportionment interchangeably, and it's really is a different process. Redistricting is the process whereby the legislative body of the jurisdiction, whether it's the city, the county, the school board, the Florida legislature, equalizes difference in population between different districts by making adjustments to the district boundaries. Reapportionment is when Congress reallocates the 435 congressional seats amongst the states based on the growth in population of a state, or perhaps the decline in population of the state. So for the next slide, in terms of why we do this, and there's a couple parts to this slide. As Eric mentioned earlier, if you look at Article 8 of the Florida Constitution and then combine that with parts of Chapter 124 of Florida statutes, you're really, in my opinion, required to examine the need to redistrict after the decennial census has been completed and the new data is released. Some of your charters may contain some additional direction in terms of redistricting. So we can go to the next part of this slide here. There are 20 charter counties. 3 contain provisions on redistricting, creating a citizens advisory board. But redistricting is important primarily because it furthers the principle of one person, one vote within the 14th and 15th Amendments to the US Constitution and then the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So let's get into a little bit of the general guidelines for redistricting. And first of all, it's the districts need to be equal in population to the greatest extent that they can be. So if we'll go to the next slide, please. It depends on how you categorize these different criteria, but there are 5, 6, maybe 10 or so different criteria that you should consider, the legislative body considers. First and foremost, though, districts need to be as equal in population as is possible. Need to be mindful to not dilute minority voting strength. Those are 1 and 2 in my mind, and then the rest of them are sort of secondary criteria. Follow census blocks, follow significant natural or man-made boundaries. They should be contiguous, preserve communities of interest. So let's go to the next slide here again. All of these criteria are balanced in concert with each other. It's impossible to create a districting plan where each criteria has been attained to the greatest extent that it can be. You balance these criteria against each other. And I think it's important also to use common sense. This is not rocket science. Use common sense in this process. So for the next slide, we'll talk about population for a while. It depends upon where you're looking. Sometimes the word as nearly equal as possible or as practicable is used. But as we said earlier, we look at the need to adjust the district boundaries after the decennial census, but you may adjust the boundaries during any odd numbered year. That's a matter of the discretion of the county legislative body. Let's go to the next slide. This is from Article 8 of the Florida Constitution. After the decennial census, the Board of County Commissioners shall divide the county into districts of contiguous territory as nearly equal in population as practicable. If we go to the next slide, we'll see where Chapter 124 provides some additional direction. Here, the term is as nearly equal in population as possible. And you can do this at any time as long as it's during an odd numbered year. There may be some of your charters that contain some direction. but it all follows a similar practice. There are 3 charters now where there is a citizens like advisory committee that's created to assist in the redistricting process. It still works its way to the county legislative body, the Board of County Commissioners, for approval, as that is the direction found in Florida statutes. But there is in these cases, an advisory board that's set up to present alternatives to the Board of County Commissioners. Next slide. It's impossible to attain absolute population equality. The goal should be to minimize the deviation from the mean, the target average district size, minimize the deviation to the smallest degree possible. Generally speaking, districts that are over or under the target population by 3% or less, that's good. Then you'd have a total deviation between the largest and the smallest district population of no more than 6 percentage points. So that's pretty good. You can get it as close to 0, that's better, but 3% is good. Population means population. Population does not mean registered voters. It's the whole population. And we'll talk about what this means a little bit later in this presentation, but it's not registered voters, it's the whole population. The direction for the Bureau of the Census is to count the whole population of all of the states within the United States. 2 districts with population differences between them of more than 10 percentage points tends to raise a red flag. And we can look at this in the next slide coming up. Here, in this case, the smallest district, District 4, the largest district, District 4, is about 5.5 percentage points over the mean, over the average. District 5, the smallest district, is about 7.4 percentage points. There's a difference there of almost 13 points, and that raises a red flag. You can make accommodations for this. If you document your record and in concert with other criteria, document why you do have a plan which has districts that are 10 percentage points or greater separation between the largest and the smallest. A couple of reasons that you might want to do this to create a minority influence or minority majority district, or if you know that there is an area within the county that is a very high growth, and you know that it is predicted to continue to grow at a high rate over the next 10 years, you can underpopulate that area in anticipation of future growth. So that's the discussion of population and as nearly equal in population as is possible. The second criteria was that we don't dilute minority voting strength. And the most common 2 ways where that occurs are through packing or cracking. Packing is when you locate most of the minority population into one district so as to dilute the influence in the other districts, or through cracking, you split the minority population into 2, 3, or more districts so as to dilute their influence in all of the districts. So we have a little example of what this might look like here in the next slide. In Sunshine County, the population is 23% green and 77% blue. And here in this instance, you can see where there are one district, District 3, has a majority of the green population, and another district, District 4, is a minority influence, a strong minority influence district under this particular plan. If we go to the next slide, we'll see how that can be changed. And on the slide to your left, where you can see the population pattern has not changed, but what has changed are the district plans. The plan to the left is an example of packing, where most of the minority population has been located into one particular district. The plan on the right, cracking, where the minority population has been spread out to 2 or 3 districts, actually 4 districts. That's cracking. The next criteria is to use census blocks, especially after the census information has been released. This is readily available information. It's presumed to be valid. You are wise to examine the data for some anomalies that occur from time to time, but it's generally speaking presumed to be valid. You can look at total population and also voting age population. And in some cases, it can be altered or supplemented with other sources of data, but you should do that with, I would say, caution, and you should be well prepared to document how you did this and why you used other sources of data. Generally speaking, after the census is out, I think you would just use the census data as it comes down from the federal government. Moving on to the next couple of criteria, you follow significant man-made or natural boundaries, water bodies, arterial roads. It's easy to understand. It's less disruptive to voter precincts. Generally speaking, census blocks follow these boundaries anyway. And I think it's wise to follow existing district boundaries when possible. It's easier for voters to understand. It's less disruptive to supervisors of elections, and it recognizes the will of the voters who elected the current incumbent. Moving on to other criteria, the remaining criteria. Districts have to be contiguous with one another. It seems pretty simple, pretty obvious. You may attain contiguity by jumping over a water body, though. You try to keep various communities of interest together, such as cities or neighborhoods. Don't draw incumbents out of their district. You may consider party affiliation. I will tell you that within the 20 or 22 plans that we have worked on, we've never considered party affiliation. And then you would seek to avoid districts that have so-called bizarre shapes, and we will see an example of that in the next slide. This is the classic gerrymandering image. This is named after Elbridge Gerry, the 9th governor of Massachusetts, and as the story goes, he had proposed this plan, and somebody said, well, that district there looks like a salamander, and somebody said, well, actually, it's a gerrymander there. So districts with bizarre shapes should be avoided, and we can look at one in the next slide here, more current slide. This was Congressional District number 12 in North Carolina. Look at the next slide, and you can see perhaps more graphically what that district looked like. But this plan was thrown out by the Supreme Court in 1993. So to summarize, population is the most important criteria. That's the total population, not registered voters. Don't dilute minority voting strength. Follow census blocks, follow significant boundaries, maintain contiguity. You try to make the districts as compact as possible, preserve community interest, and you may consider party affiliation. It's impossible for any plan to attain all of those criteria. It simply can't be done. What you do, though, is you balance all of these criteria in concert with each other, recognizing that population is always the most dominant criteria. And then lastly, use common sense. This is an example of some statistics from the Leon County School Board redistricting plan. In Leon County, the school board has 5 single-member districts. The county commission has 5 single-member districts and 2 at large. Several years ago, when the school board was redistricting itself, there was an effort underway to make the boundaries of the school board coterminous with the district boundaries of the 5 single-member districts in Leon County. And so Plan 5 did that. And if you look at the far right column in the red circle, you can see where the deviation between the largest and the smallest districts under that plan was only 1.3 percentage points. Remember that more than 10 is a red flag. So that was very good. But if you look to the left in the blue circle, you can see where that was attained, that 1.3 percentage point was attained through enormous changes in the population of the existing districts. And so in 2 districts, over half the people after redistricting would have been new to the incumbent there. Plan 1, down at the bottom, had a much higher deviation from the mean between the largest and the smallest, but only a 10 or 11 percentage point addition of new residents into each of the districts. And Plan 1 was the plan that the school board ended up going with. So use some common sense in the redistricting process. And Eric, I think we can take some questions now if there are any.
Okay, I have too many mice. We do have a couple of questions. The first question is, what if you are under a federal order for way your district was approved and created?
I assume that question means there was a lawsuit some time ago. The federal court ordered the county most likely to go from a system of at-large districts to single-member districts. And at the time that order was issued, perhaps there was a plan that was appended to the order of the court. I think it depends upon what the order says, but I think certainly districting plans are not static. The reason that, if my assumption is correct, the reason that these plans are ordered the way they are is to further the principle of one person, one vote, And so it is, doesn't make sense that the plan should remain static indefinitely. But you would need to, I'm not a lawyer, but you would need to look at the order of the court and see if you need to go back to the court to get a new plan approved or not. But you certainly, it doesn't make sense to that districting plans remain static indefinitely, if that's the question.
Okay, and if the person that asked that question wants it clarified, please go ahead and put in a follow-up for that. Bart, the next one is, we have districts. However, the entire county votes for all commissioners. Do you think this alleviates the packing and cracking issue, since everyone in the county votes for every candidate and every commissioner votes on every issue?
Yeah. So in this case, these are at-large commission districts, but there are residence areas where the 5 different commissioners, or however many it might be, must reside. I think it does address the packing and cracking issue. What we usually do there is we try to follow the same criteria as we would with any other plan, but the application of the criteria is not as sharp or as robust as you would with a single member districting plan.
Thank you. Next question. Is it required that the counties redistrict this year after the decennial census, or could they wait until 2023 if the census data comes out late in the year? Good question.
Yeah. We're going to get into the census issue towards the end of the webinar. We'll address that question at that time.
Okay. And there's a couple, there was another follow-up question that was very similar, and to the person who put that question in, if that's not what you were asking, please go ahead and submit another question. Yeah. Okay. This might be something. Can the timeline be amended to delay in acquiring census data?
I think it's possible to do that, to accommodate that, and we can talk about that towards the end as well.
And similarly, as a follow-up, what are the legal ramifications for a county if redistricting process is not done in time?
I think, I'm not a lawyer. I think someone might go to court and try to force a redistricting plan in place, but I do know that, I don't want to get too far ahead of this, but this problem now with the delay in the census is affecting the state of Florida as well. And I know that the Office of Economic and Demographic Research, which is a professional staff from the House, Senate, Governor's Office, they are looking at these issues now as we speak.
And there are, just in the chat, similar questions to that. So I think we'll go ahead, and if I got that last one. Oh, I think you're going to address this, but the question is, how is the prison population in the county handled?
We are going to do that with our next slide.
Okay, so for everyone, thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. And Kurt, let's go ahead and get back to the second part.
Okay. So if we can go to the next slide, this is an example in Jefferson County, Florida. Here, and this touches ironically on one of the questions that were just asked. Here they redistricted in 2013. They did not initiate the process or complete it anyway in 2011. But the first step in the process is to, when you have the new data available, is that you layer the existing district boundaries onto the new data, and then you can see if you're out of alignment or not. And in this case, Jefferson County, the The smallest district was 7 percentage points under the mean. The largest was 5 points over. So they had to redistrict. And if we can go to the next slide, this was the existing boundaries prior to redistricting. And if we go to the next slide, we can see what happened here. And in Jefferson County, there is a state prison with around 1,100 people in the prison. Under the case law at that time, we counted that population. And we'll talk about whether or not you need to count prison population in a few slides from here. But some people would say the people in the prison can't vote. The county doesn't provide any services to them. In a county of 14 or 15,000 people, a district where it includes 1,100 people who have no ability to vote or exercise their opinion on things, that really distorts the system. And so if you look at the map on the right side here, this is, there was a lawsuit after the redistricting plan was adopted by the county commission. It went to federal court here in Tallahassee. The judge ruled that, Judge Walker, that you may not count prison population. And so then we came back in 2016, I think it was, with a plan to realign the population of the districts, but not counting the 1,100 people that resided in the Jefferson Correctional Institute. And we can see the effects of that in the next slide, please. The upper table shows the effect of removing 1,100 people from district number 3. And so district 3 instantly became 43% under the target population. And so what we did then with the final map, where we did not count the present population, you see it dropped the population of Jefferson County from about 14,700 people down to 13,600. But there had to be significant realignment of the district boundaries there. So let's move on to the next section. Just a couple of sort of issues that I see coming in this redistricting cycle now. If we go to the next slide. The counting of the present population, the impact of the Fair Districts amendments, what is a minority under the Voting Rights Act, and then our fave, the 2020 census. So if we can go to the next slide. There's about 100,000 people in Florida who are incarcerated in a state or federal prison and do not have voting rights, at least at that time. The impact of this is particularly significant on smaller jurisdictions, but the census counts people without regard to age or voting status. So let's go to the next slide. There's been different opinions from either the Attorney General or the courts in terms of prison population. For years, we were told that you must count population. You must use the entire population of the jurisdiction. Then in 2016, This is the case that I just was talking about in front of Judge Walker. Judge Walker said you may not count present population. So we went back to the drawing board, took present population out, and drew the new maps. And ironically, the new maps, the new plan was due back at Judge Walker's office. I believe it was on April 5th, 2016. On April 4th, 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court in Evanwell versus Abbott. Abbott is the governor of Texas. The Supreme Court ruled that this was an issue as to whether or not you could draw a districting plan based just on registered voters. And the Supreme Court said that you may draw districts based on total population. So, you know, how that affects the decision of Judge Walker in the Jefferson County case, I think remains to be seen. And it's just something that you should be mindful of, you know, in your redistricting process. So if we go to the next question, recall that in 2010, there were 2 amendments to the Florida Constitution that were adopted by the voters, the so-called Fair Districts amendments. And go to the next slide, we'll look at what they say. And they were attempts to ensure that you know, district boundaries were you know, equal in population, reasonably compact, utilized existing political geographical boundaries, things like that. The next slide, though, these don't apply to cities or counties. I think those you can, you know, attempt to follow those guidelines in your redistricting process. Those are reasonable policies to follow, but they are not directed to cities or county governments. I bring this up because in the last 2 projects that we were involved with, comments were made and challenges were made, at least in one of the cases, that we didn't follow the Fair Districts amendment, and the court pretty quickly threw that argument from the plaintiffs out. So let's go to the next slide. You know, the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. It sort of implements the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, prohibits policies that result in discrimination against racial or language minorities. But what is a minority? If we go to the next slide. In Quincy, the city of Quincy, their redistricting plan was challenged on the basis of that it was discriminatory against the non-Hispanic white minority that was in that jurisdiction. There was a lawsuit. The lawsuit was thrown out on other grounds, so never really got around to making a decision as to what a minority is or is not. But that's another issue that might come up in the process moving ahead. So now let's go to the census. You know, that we do this every 10 years in the United States. The census day this past year is April 1st of 2020, was April 1st of 2020, but the process really started the year before, and it's sort of the gold standard, I would say, of population estimates and counts for the purposes of redistricting. But there's always could be some problems with it. So we can go to the next slide.
First question, how many people live at this residence?
0.
You don't live here? Oh, including me? 3.
So you would be wise to look at the data and see if something just stands out as being questionable. But here is the plan for the 2020 census. Started actively counting in January of last year, and the target is to deliver reapportionment counts to Congress by the end of last year, and then redistricting counts to states, which means state and local governments, by the end of March of this year. Here's what really happened. With COVID, we had the first COVID case in January of 2020. The travel ban was initiated shortly thereafter. The census suspended field operations in March, and it caused everything to get pushed back. And so the target now to deliver reapportionment counts to Congress is April of this year. And a couple of weeks ago, I think it was on February 12th, the Census Bureau made an announcement that their new target for delivering redistricting counts to the state and local governments is now September of 2021. So if we go to the next slide, this question has sort of come up already. So there's a couple of different options here, I think, for you. If you, let's say we get the data at the end of September, recognizing that the month of December, it's really only the first week or 10 days of December that are useful given the holidays that come up. And so that gives you October, November, and maybe 10 days of December to get this process done. I've said this to some of you before. The process of drawing the map, the mechanical process of drawing the map, is quite simple. Once you have the data uploaded and you have the existing district boundaries uploaded and other information, city boundaries, parks, major roads, natural features, water bodies, things like that. The process of redrawing the lines is relatively simple. What's difficult is building consensus amongst community leaders, elected officials, county commissioners. That takes time, and that's the challenge with this process if you get the data late. But under this model here, where we use just the census data, my advice would be to, get prepared to use the data and the process, get ready for the process now. Acquire the software that you might need. You can discuss criteria that you're going to be used in the process. So do you want your deviation from the mean, is it going to be capped at 3%, 2%, 4%? Set a schedule once you get the data, that you can jump on this schedule right away. Then once you get the data, you can examine the need to redistrict or not. But you would then go to initial maps. If you're out of alignment, go to initial maps, hold some public hearings, some public workshops, and then with a target of adopting the final plan in the first week or 10 days of December. The next slide shows an alternative to this plan. And that is this, that you would adjust the 2010 data by generally accepted demographic principles. And there's the state of Florida, the Florida legislature uses data from the University of Florida Bureau of Economic and Business Research every year. And you can make adjustments to the 2010 data with the Bieber data. That will not be perfect. There's a lot of discrepancies that will occur there, but at least it's something that you could begin the process with. Then once the 2020 data is available, you can upload that data. Hopefully the differences won't be too significant, and then finish the process again during the first week or 10 days of December of this year. So Eric, that's all the information that I have now. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yeah, we got, let me see. Someone asked a question, and it basically said the difference between jail population and prison population with respect to what the court has ruled. Can you count the jail population?
Well, to my knowledge, Judge Walker in the Jefferson County decision was the only decision that I'm familiar with where the court said, don't count the prison population. So I think the assumption has always been to count the jail population. The question is, should you count the prison population, yes or no? I mean, people who are in jail presumably have not yet been adjudicated for whatever the crime is that they're in jail for. So their ability to vote doesn't necessarily, the fact that they're in jail does not mean that they no longer have the right to vote.
Another question, and actually this is a question I had. Maybe you can talk about this actually maybe in two pieces, because you were just talking about timelines, revised timelines. I didn't see anywhere in chapter 124 that sets forth really other than where it speaks to you can change the boundaries in odd years, odd number of years. What's the timeline requirements to actually do the redistricting? And then the question that someone put in was, are there legal ramifications for if the redistricting is not done in time?
Well, again, I'm not a lawyer, and we can look at the Jefferson County example, and when they most recently started the redistricting process, it was in 2013. So after the 2010 census, Jefferson County, if you take a literal read of Article 8 in Chapter 124, it says after the decennial census, county shall redistrict, which would, in that case, would have meant 2011. They obviously did not do that. I don't know that they were challenged or someone sought some sort of action in court that forced them to initiate the process in 2013.
Yeah, I mean, I guess an underlying guiding principle might be you want to forget the clock and the calendar. You want to get it right, so irrespective of missing whatever artificial timeline might be out there. Another question is, and I'm going to kind of amend this question. It says, how much public participation should a county have in the redistricting creation process? I know you indicated that you've got to have a redistricting board. What do you typically see set up when a county goes to go through this process? How is it structured?
Well, there's only three charters that provide for a redistricting board or a citizens redistricting committee. Most counties don't have these advisory bodies that exist. What I would typically suggest is that you get the data, you put the existing boundaries on top of the data. You see if your districts are out of alignment and if they need to be adjusted to bring populations differences closer to zero. Then you would come out with 2 or 3 plans that are legally sufficient and take them out for public input. I mean, you first would meet with each commissioner individually to see if they have preferences in terms of making adjustments to district boundaries, come up with some plans, then take them out either in terms of meetings with just county commissioners, or you might think about having a meeting in each of the, if you have 5 single member districts or 5 or 7, or think about holding a public meeting within each of those district areas to get input from the public in terms of what they think in terms of the boundaries for the particular district that they live in. So I think, things like that are always wise to do. I think it's most effective if you do the meetings in person. With the virus, that makes it much more difficult to do. But there are meetings such as we have right now where you can do these things online and post different alternative maps on a website to get input from the public.
Is there, other than an informal appeal process, is there anything that's in law that says, someone can challenge us instead of going to the court?
There's not I think you can always make a case in front of the county commission, but I don't think there's any sort of an informal process other than going to court after the final plan is adopted.
A couple other questions we got. He asked, how high is our confidence that data will actually be released earlier in September rather than later?
Good question. We don't know. We don't know. The press release said the end of September. Maybe it'll come out September 20th. I don't know. The historically, data came out sort of on a rolling basis, with the last piece of data coming out on or before March 31st. They clearly have a different approach this time. So in addition to the data coming out a little bit late, they have a lot late. They have said that it's not going to come out on a rolling basis. It's all 50 states is going to be released whenever it gets released, September 30th, September 20th. We're not sure yet, but it all will be released at once.
Thank you. Question, should counties consider municipal boundaries when drawing districts?
It's a common criteria. You commonly do that. It's sometimes difficult to do that. If the city boundary is, if the city is very large geographically speaking, it might be difficult to do that, but that's a common criteria. Now, I will say this, there are instances where, as a matter of policy, especially if a county has recently moved from a system of at-large districts to single-member districts, where the counter argument has been made where it might be desirable to have municipal boundaries split by two districts, so that the residents within that city, because they lost the opportunity to vote for all 5 commissioners, at least now they can have the opportunity to vote for 2. All right, so there's a little bit of an evolving opinion on splitting municipal boundaries or not.
So Kurt, related to that, the next question, it's a good one. It says, does the redistricting apply to cities and school districts?
It does. However, for cities, and I'm not sure for schools, but I know for cities, there is not specific statutory direction like there is for counties. But you might see discussion about the need to redistrict and when and how you do that in the municipal charter, and the use of an advisory committee or advisory board to help out with that process seems to be a little bit more common in municipal charters than county charters.
And related to that, do the school board or county commission districts have to align, or do they take into other factors and considerations?
They don't have to align, but I think that is a worthy goal to try to attain if you can do it without significant disruption. We talked about the Leon County example earlier today. There it was done in a way, or the attempt was done in a way where it would have been very disruptive to the school board incumbents. But I think in general, it's a worthwhile goal to try to do that. It's easier for the supervisor elections. It's less confusing for the public. I think there's good reasons to do that if you can get there without causing too much chaos in the process.
You have another sort of timeline question. It's, if we do not adopt in the odd number year, do we have to wait to the next odd number year? If not 2021, have to wait until 2023?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that you are limited to only do this in an odd numbered year. I would assume you could work on it in an even numbered year, but it can only be formally adopted during an odd numbered year.
All right, next question. What's the protocol to follow if there are no changes in population growth? Does the existing district map need to be readopted?
I think you should go through a process where you can confirm that the existing boundaries are acceptable the way they are. And I think, I'm not a lawyer, I think it would be wise to readopt them given what the Constitution and Chapter 124 says. But that should be a fairly simple process if there's not been significant growth, or if the growth has been evenly distributed throughout all of the districts within the county.
Next question. Can we make large changes to the district boundaries, or are we limited to small, insignificant adjustments?
I think you're not limited to small, insignificant adjustments. I think you can make large changes if the county commission, if the county legislative body desired to do so within some constraints. I mean, you would not want to draw a plan where a sitting commissioner was no longer in his or her district, right? Things like that. And within the population constraints that we talked about earlier, where the deviation from the mean between the largest and the smallest district should not be more than 10 percentage points. But within those constraints, I think it's your decision if you wanted to make a significant changes to district boundaries.
And Kurt, I don't know if you, your answer was affirming enough, but the question was, again, back to the cities and school districts, are they required by the Constitution to do the redistricting every 10 years or after the census, just the way counties are?
Well, they are not, to my knowledge, they are not required by Florida statutes or the Florida Constitution, but they may be required by their own charter. But I think everyone is obligated to look at the population of the legislative body districts and to make adjustments to further the principle of one person, one vote.
Yeah, good. And I think we're towards the end. I want to make sure this question, and I'm not really exactly sure. It says, can you speak more to the option 2 you presented? If we want to move forward with the process, what other data sources can we use for population? I was going back through your slides on option 2. Can you address that?
Yeah. I think there are ways to make adjustments to the 2010 data so that it would reflect growth that has occurred since that time. But it's not perfect. I mean, I think Beeper does a very, very good job of estimating the population of all 67 counties and 410 cities every year within the state of Florida. You could take their most recent estimates and apply those growth percentages to the cities within your county and to the unincorporated area within your county. That would be the simplest way to do that. Here's a couple problems with that right away. We don't know, and ironically, I think this would be more accurate the greater the number of cities that you had in your county. We don't know, though, what the pattern of growth is. And so if the unincorporated area grew by 20%, 25%, we don't know if it's applied uniformly throughout the entire unincorporated area, or if it's only in the northern end of the county and maybe not so much in the southern end. So there's one flaw with that. And the same thing is true with cities. We don't know if it's, most growth is in what part of the city it's occurred. Now, that's especially a problem if a county commission district line bisects a city. If we say that the city of XYZ has grown by 30% over the past 10 years, and that city is now split between District 1 and District 2, we don't know if it's grown as equally in the two different areas of that city. But it's better than the 2010 data. And it could be used in terms of getting a feel for how new districts might look. But I would not, my advice would not be to use something like that in the final plan. It's just a preliminary sort of exercise that you could go through to sort of get a feel for how population changes might be occurring in your county. Once the 2020 data comes out, you've got to use that data. I would not rely on something else at this point in time. If you're 5, 6, 7 years into the next decennial timeline and you wanted to redistrict at that time, then there might be a reason to make further tweaks to the 2020 data. But I would stick with the 2020 data once it comes out this time.
Well, Kurt, as predicted, we've gone over an hour. I knew this was going to happen, and I asked if we could just kind of push forward if you had the time, but I want to kind of wrap some of this up. I know we did have two questions. No, excuse me, the same question from two participants that asked about the redistricting advisory board. They're from Pinellas Charter, and they just asked if you knew of the other two.
The first one in the charter counties was in Brevard. And the other, that they've used that now for, I think, for the past two cycles. And then Columbia County also adopted a redistricting advisory board to their charter a couple of years ago. So this will be the first cycle, I think, both for Columbia and Pinellas when they're using a citizens advisory board.
Right. I got one last question because it's from a rural county, and it's a good question. It says we're a rural county. We have some precincts with 10,000 voters, but some have 3,000 voters. It just said, generally, does that mean we're not in compliance? I mean,
It's not voters, it's people. It's now, if you had a district with, not knowing the rest of the information about the county, but generally speaking, if it's a rural county and you have one district with 10,000 people and another district with 3,000 people, you can pretty much assume that you're going to be out of compliance there. But it's people that's the measurement. It's not registered voters.
We're going to have to probably shut it down, and I apologize for some of the other folks that had questions. We are going to post the presentation. We have recorded the video. We have to do a little bit of editing, so it won't be posted immediately. And then Kurt's contact information are on it's actually on the first slide. It's actually his phone number, his email, his website. Kurt, you want to just say a few things? If people have some questions and they want to reach out to you, just go ahead.
Feel free to shoot me an email or give me a phone call or send me a text. I'll be happy to respond to any other questions that we didn't have time to answer.
Okay, so Kurt, again, thank you very much. As I mentioned at the very beginning to the participants, this is a fairly dense presentation. I didn't mean that to be in the negative. It was just a lot of content and a lot of stuff. I'm glad you were able to come on and talk about this and share some of your insight. And maybe we'll have you back on kind of later on in the year and see how things progress as the census begins to unroll the information, particularly if people have an interest in having you back. So anyway, again, thank you. And to all our participants, thank you again. If you've got questions for us, please send them out to either me or to Becky, and we'll get back to you. So thank you again.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.